All right. So here at the Mandel School, we have the opportunity to touch hard topics and to think about difficult things and to have difficult conversations. Today will be no different. So I welcome you, current students of the Mandel School, potential students of the Mandel School, and anyone from the Undergraduate School of Arts and Sciences here at Case Western Reserve University. Welcome to our talk today. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can be used to either empower or marginalize. Words do have power, y'all. And as a matter of fact, every word that the tongue forms or is communicated via text or sign carries the potential to either empower or to marginalize. So what of African American Vernacular English or Black language, juxtaposed to Standard English or mainstream English? It ain't no secret that Black folks, Black linguistics, and Black literacy have been a topic of discussion and also a topic of scholarship in the US for many years. I wonder if there is a place for Black English or Black language in the academy. In her book, Linguistic Justice, Black Language, Literacy, Identity, and Pedagogy, April Baker Bell notes that people's language experiences are not separate from their experiences as people in Black bodies. In fact, when a Black child's means of expressing culture, context, and movement and identity come under the scrutiny by way of the heavy hand of the requirement to only use Standard English as a means of expression, the child as a whole is devalued. In fact, the child's family, community, and lived experience sustain a crushing blow. Now, I don't want y'all to be mad at me if today during this conversation I decide to interject a little bit of Black English or Black language. I'll be doing it to drive home a point that perhaps we ought to be moving toward a more inclusive linguistic repertoire, even within the academy. Lately, my teaching has directed me to better understand the full impact of language and discourse, whether it be in the written form of books to billboards, in language from civil discussions to riotous protests, or in body language from affirming nods and head shaking, which I see here, or the side eye. And lastly, in the use of Black language or Black English versus Standard English or mainstream English. Herein lies the focus of our time together today, the inclusion of the linguistic repertoire spoken by everyday Black folks in their sequestered spaces, but not in the academy. Let's first consider the inception of African American Vernacular English or Black language. The linguistic variations of African American Vernacular English, let me just go back to this for a second. When I typed 8, my computer told me I was wrong, right? All right. So let's consider the inception of African American Vernacular English or Black language. The linguistic variations of AAVE or BL have been described by linguistic scholars as the Africanization of European languages. These variations are considered languages in their own right. So yes, Creole is a language. Patois, I can say it. Patois is a language. Pidgin is a language. And here in the US, Black language or African American Vernacular English is also a language. I think that we can all agree that there has been a move toward erasure regarding Africanized linguistic elements within our educational and social spheres. As early as primary school, well-intentioned teachers feed Standard English or mainstream English to students right next to Mandarin, right next to German, right next to French and Spanish. I dare say that there are some well-intentioned parents who scold their children for using Black language outside of the home. This erasure ultimately suggests a move toward the erasure of the identity of the individuals who use these linguistic elements. Historically, the linguistic and paralinguistic features, which represent communicative competence of the descendants of enslaved peoples within the US and the Caribbean, was referred to as non-standard English or broken English. I assert to you this afternoon that these labels reach much deeper than the surface and translate to the presumed non-standard and brokenness of the very culture and personhood of the individual speaking the language. Again, scholars, specifically Smitherman, suggests that Black language is an Africanized form of English, reflecting Black folks' linguistic, cultural African heritage, along with the conditions of 246 years of enslavement and oppression. Flipping between the use of Black language and standard English, which has come to be called code switching, is the social denial of one language and the social acceptance of another. This sets up a kind of Du Boisian double consciousness, the dilemma of the divided self, torn between westernization and surviving African memories. Linguist Abdul Najee suggests that during enslavement, Africans maintained their culture even while European cultures were being imposed upon them. He proposes that the base of African culture still exists within language. This is evident in the literary genius of many, including August Wilson, Toni Morrison, Langston Hughes, Sonia Sanchez, and Tazaki Shanji, who openly employ the use of Black language in their literary works. Like Najee, Kenyan writer Gugu wa Thiong'o suggests that the diasporan African was simply reacting to the decimation of his inherited language and the imposition of the conqueror by creating a new language, Africanized English. From a linguistic perspective, there are specific grammatical structures and sound rules which come directly from West African languages. Yes, y'all, West African languages do have rules. In some African languages, sentences are formed without the use of the verb to be. The use or non-use of the verb to be is the most frequently cited piece, I dare say, of non-standard or broken English. Now I need a little bit of audience participation. Can anyone provide a sentence for me as an example of a sentence formed with the use of the verb to be in what is considered a non-standard or broken manner? Anybody want to give me a quick sentence? I be sick. Thank you very much, Dr. Miller. I be sick, right? Perfect. In African languages, there are also rules regarding sound structures. One such rule governs the avoidance of consonant pairs. This rule helps us to validate such exchanges for the word just, J-U-S, for the word just, J-U-S-T. Another sound pattern is the lack of a sound for the letter R in African languages. This helps us to validate the word mo, M-O, or M-O-W for the word more, M-O-R-E. Another sound pattern is the lack of the sound for the letters TH when paired. This helps us to validate words like dis, D-I-S, for this, T-H-I-S, and dat for D-A-T for the word that, T-H-A-T. Another pattern of consonant variation within Black language is dropping the letter G at the end of a word. Interestingly, the fast food giant McDonald's uses it in their jingle to their favor and to their validation. And y'all know exactly what it is. Say it with me. I'm loving it. I'm loving it, y'all. I'm loving it. It's perfectly acceptable in that realm. Is there a place for Black language Africanized English, Ebonics, African American Vernacular English, call it whatever you wish, in our academic institutions? Is there a place for Black language during classroom discourse? Does the speaker use it with shame? Do others shun its use, or is it anticipated, accepted, and respected? As mentioned earlier, April Bell Baker notes that people's language experiences are not separate from their experiences as people who live in Black bodies. And a crushing blow is delivered every time Black language is used in the classroom and a student is unceremoniously side-eyed or is corrected by those in power. Linguist Jane Hill, the author of The Everyday Language of White Racism, helps us to understand language and discourse as insidious drivers of racism. Alongside other scholars, she points out how the use or the non-use of the verb to be is disdained. Would you think differently of me if I said of Dr. Nancy Rolock, she a good researcher, y'all, versus she is a good researcher? Would you think differently of me if I said of Dr. David Miller, he a rock star, versus he is a rock star? And lastly, would you think differently of me if I looked at Michaela and Adrianne and Fayron and I said, y'all coming to class next week? You coming to class next week? Versus, are you all coming to class next week? Would you think differently of me? And lastly, let's look at think about a line from the Washington Times. Tribal officials acquitted in North Dakota pipeline protests. Somehow it makes perfect sense in that space, but the verb to be is missing. Tribal officials are acquitted in North Dakota pipeline protests. Again, scholars, let's go to the right page. Hill states, systems of constraint on thought like discourses, worldviews, and frames exist below the level of consciousness. They are invisible to us, and yet they constitute our world. Critical theories of racism aim to make them visible, to parse their terms and logics, and to interpret their terms with constructive, alternative, anti-racist discourses. All of the scholars and researchers whom we have brought to the fore this afternoon help us to better understand that the lack of acceptance and respect of other languages is an insidious driver of division and exclusion. I'm going to ask y'all to bear with me. We're going to take about 5 minutes, and we are going, shouldn't have moved that, huh? Okay, we're going to take about 5 minutes, and we are going to listen to Dr. Jamila Lyscott and her discourse on language.
Today, a baffled lady observed the shell where my soul dwells and announced that I'm articulate. Which means that when it comes to enunciation and diction, I don't even think of it because I'm articulate. So when my professor asks a question and my answer is tainted with the connotation of urbanized suggestion, there's no misdirected intention. Pay attention, because I'm articulate. So when my father asks, what kind of thing is this? My articulate answer never goes amiss. I say, Father, this is the impending problem at hand, and when I'm on the block, I switch it up just because I can. So when my boy says, what's good with you, son? I say, I just fall out with them people, but I done. And sometimes in class, I might pause the intellectual sound and flow to ask, yo, why these books never be about my peoples? Yes, I have decided to treat all three of my languages as equal because I'm articulate. But who controls articulation? Because the English language is a multifaceted oration subject to indefinite transformation. Now, you may think that it is ignorant to speak broken English, but I'm here to tell you that even articulate Americans sound foolish to the British. So when my professor comes on the block and says hello, I stop him and say no. You're being inarticulate. The proper way is to say what's good. Now, you may think that's too hood. That's not cool. But I'm here to tell you that even our language has rules. So when mommy mocks me and says, y'all be mad going to the store, I say, mommy, no. That sentence is not following the law. Never does the word mad go before a present participle. That's simply the principle of this English. If I had the vocal capacity, I would sing this from every mountaintop, every suburbia, and every hood. Because the only God of language is the one recorded in the Genesis of this world, saying it is good, so I may not always come before you with excellency of speech, but do not judge me by my language and assume that I'm too ignorant to teach, because I speak 3 tongues. One for each, home, school, and friends. I'm a trilingual orator. Sometimes I'm consistent with my language now, then switch it up so I don't bore later. Sometimes I fight back 2 tongues while I use the other one in the classroom. And when I mistakenly mix them up, I feel crazy like I'm cooking in the bathroom. I know that I had to borrow your language because mine was stolen. But you can't expect me to speak your history wholly while mine is broken. These words are spoken by someone who is simply fed up with the Eurocentric ideals of this season. And the reason I speak a composite version of your language is because mine was raped away along with my history. I speak broken English so the profusing gashes can remind us that our current state is not a mystery. I'm so tired of the negative images that are driving my people mad. So unless you've seen it rob a bank, stop calling my hair bad. I'm so sick of this nonsensical racial disparity, so don't call it good unless your hair is known for donating to charity as much as has been raped away from our people. How can you expect me to treat their imprint on your language as anything less than equal? Let there be no confusion. Let there be no hesitation. This is not a promotion of ignorance. This is a linguistic celebration. That's why I put trilingual on my last job application. I can help to diversify your consumer market is all I wanted them to know. When they call me for the interview, I'll be more than happy to show that I can say what's good, what's agwan, and of course, hello. Because I'm articulate. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Jamila Scott really does drive the point home. So let's carry on. Where do we go from here? Dr. J, as she calls herself, asks us to lean into something called liberation literacies. Liberation literacies is about social justice in discourse. It's about how we use language in ways that are helpful and conversely quite damaging. She asks us to think about this paradigm shift on 3 different levels. First, the intrapersonal, second, the interpersonal, and lastly, the community or the institution. On the intrapersonal level, Dr. J asks us to develop a critical awareness of ourselves and how we use language. On the interpersonal level, Dr. J asks us to take a critical awareness of our relationships with others and what those linguistic exchanges look like. Whose language do we lean toward? And lastly, regarding the institution or the community, Dr. J says that we need to have a critical awareness of the academic community, how the academic community is using language, the language of some, at the expense of silencing the language of others. Dr. J suggests a framework for us to begin to do this work, not only on the individual level, but also on the institutional level. Her framework goes from awareness to agency and access to actualization to achievement, and lastly, to alteration and action. So awareness is about me asking myself the question, who am I as an educator? Who are you as a staff member? Who are you as a student? What are your language practices? What language do you speak? And how do you name the world around you? Each of us has a linguistic repertoire. Agency and access is about privileges and agency and access as a result of the languages that we speak. How am I able to access or not different communities as a result of my linguistic repertoire? Actualization is about how my language repertoire creates different ways of knowing and continuous opportunities for me or not. Am I willing to disrupt traditional notions of learning and at the inclusion of other linguistic repertoires? Achievement is about the ability to maintain rigorous and powerful standards in the institution and the classroom, because of course we want to do that, but at the same time challenge these same standards so that the institution can then be transformed as we are being transformed as educators, as students, and as staff members. Lastly, we have alteration and action. How is my institution invested in gaining understanding of the languages considered broken or non-standard? Is my institution adaptable? Is it interested in other ways of knowing the world? Is it willing to reimagine the institutional space, including the curriculum? Does my institution understand that there are different ways of knowing the world? Perhaps as an institution, perhaps as budding social workers or potential social work students, we might consider going to another country to serve or to work or to learn. If we were to do that, I am just sure that we would take the time to learn about the culture of that people that we were going to visit. We would take the time to memorize a few words and understand their meaning within context, of course. So I wonder why, or do we not owe the same thing to individuals in Black and brown communities right here in the United States? Those individuals that we will likely serve once we leave this place. This is about validation, acceptance, and respect of Black languages, learning customs, culture, and the people. I would like to leave you with a statement from Robert Twigg. He said this in 1973. This is to all non-Africanized English speakers. As you study this language and its culture, it may be helpful to remember that you are studying a language which may be foreign to you, which may be foreign to your own, but one which is equally correct, functional, and dignified as your own, and one which belongs to a proud people, the same as your own. So with that, I ask the question that I began with: does Black language have a place in the academy?